guys, so you'll have to excuse me a bit. There's a bit of a mess on my whiteboard. You know, we're still in February break, so I've still got a lot of other responsibilities that I must tend to. Okay, AP exams aren't going to take themselves. So but by the way, I'll put a picture up on screen right now. Never do this when you're in high school. Like, this is a very stupid idea. What I did here. AP exams were not designed to be taken 10 at a time, but regardless, we're here now, and we're gonna do fine, we're gonna do fine. The schedule's been rather horrendous, but here we are, If you guys ever need help with any other AP classes, I'm kind of the jack of all trades at this point. But I digress. We've got... even though there's an insurmountable amount of work to do, there's Christian humanism to teach, and the meek to teach it. So that's what we're gonna need to do today. All right. So what's on this subject today? Let me think. Oh yes, intention and voluntary human acts. And I gotta wash my whiteboard. This is disgusting. Anywho, so. We've discussed in the past few chapters for a while now what exactly categorizes what we call a free act or a voluntary act. Okay? Now, we've constantly been discussing up until this point that we need two things. We need to know the thing which we've been choosing. The intellect must know the thing that we're observing, that we're going to choose, and the will must freely choose it. Okay? We must be able to freely choose it through our will. Okay? Now these free acts, the voluntary acts, we're going to henceforth refer to them by their synonym, human acts, or moral acts. Now, this stands in stark contrast to something we call acts of man. Now, acts of man are the complete opposite. Acts of man are involuntary acts that we may perform without knowing. Your breathing is an act of man. You waking up every morning at a certain time in the day is an act of man. You necessarily going out to hunt or find something to eat is an act of man. Your habits, some of them are acts of man. We're going to come back to habits towards the end of the video. But acts of man are acts which you did not freely choose. When we're dealing with morality and ethics, the only thing we're worried about is the human acts. Because the human acts are the only acts that you can be held responsible for. Responsible. Okay? They're voluntary, you willingly chose to do them, therefore you also had the option to not do them or to do something else. Let's come back to my Romanian gentleman sees the elderly gentleman drop his wallet on the sidewalk. You have the option to pick up the wallet and sneakily scurry away. You have options. And if you did not have options, then it would not be considered a human act. We categorize the examinations of someone's voluntary human acts as examining their conduct. Okay? Conduct. Now, conduct is something that stands in stark contrast to the word behavior. Now, I'm going to explain these in the form of sort of a duality so that you can understand what's going on here. Conduct is a measure of voluntary human acts. So, conduct would be assessing the morality of one's acts. Because remember, you can only assess the morality of acts which are voluntary, up here. Acts which are voluntary. Which means, like we've learned in previous chapters, the only organisms capable of voluntary acts are organisms with free will, and therefore only humans. You can only evaluate the conduct of humans. Okay? So behavior is the observation of involuntary acts. This behavior, we can observe the behavior of man, or we can observe the behavior of animals. Yes, and one more thing. When we talk about voluntary human acts, a certain image comes to mind. For example, the image of a little boy that I may or may not know, or may not be myself, walking past, let's say, another teenager who, for example, is not very careful with how he comports himself. Let's say he's got a very expensive watch on, he's got a bunch of spare bills bulging out of his pocket, and it's very obvious that he's a very well-off individual, and he doesn't know how to keep his finances secure. So, when I look at this, I'm obviously given two options. I can either take the money, or I cannot take it. And I don't think I need to explain which one's evil and which one's good. Which one was good? It's not important which one's good and which one's evil. My point is, let's say I chose to take the man's wallet. Okay? Take the wallet. In my intellect, I had elaborated that I was going to take the man's wallet. But before I got the chance to take the man's wallet, he got picked up by his friend and he drove back to the safety of his own home. Okay? So, my question to you now is, because I did not ever take the wallet, did I commit an evil act? And the answer is yes, I did commit an evil act. Because I had the intention to. So that's big right here. You can commit evil and disordered acts only in your intellect and mental scape. Alright? You can tell your will to do an evil act, and even without the evil act ever have been committed, you have still performed an evil act in your mind. It doesn't need to happen in the physical realm for it to be a voluntary human act. You willingly chose to take the man's wallet. You intended to do it. Now, that's very different from want or desire. Everyone wants the money this guy has, but not everyone intends to steal it. Okay? So a want is an act of man, while an intention is a voluntary human act. Every act starts with the end. Okay? You have an end. You have a goal. In this case, you want to get money. Alright? Now, in that, we evaluate the means. There are multiple forms of means which we can use to obtain that. We can go get a job, or we can go around pickpocketing. Okay? And once the different means are presented to the intellect takes in all of these options, and it does this process called deliberation. That's when it considers all of the different ways it can achieve its ends, and after it has deliberated, it will produce the last practical judgment. The intellect tells the will to do this thing, okay? Now, once this is sent to the will, this is where your conscience comes into play. We covered conscience last chapter. And your conscience decides whether or not this act is good or evil. And remember, the conscience can be an error. So this last practical judgment that made by the intellect could tell the will, steal the man's wallet, and the conscience might tell the will that that's good, but the conscience can still be an error. Okay? If the will then gives its consent, it's basically the conscience reasoning whether it's good or not. If the conscience says it's good, the will gives its consent. If the conscience says it's evil, the will does not give its consent. Anyway, once we're at this point, then we have formed the intention to go forward with something. So let's look at a big chart that I'm going to draw for you guys about the decision-making process. All right, so we're going to start up here with knowledge of, let's say, the environment. Okay? So this knowledge of the environment is, let's say, the bank left the vault door open, okay? Open safe. The bank left the vault door open. Now, this information will come into the intellect. All right? There's nothing you can do to stop information being taken into the intellect. You can't unsee something. So this stage right here is involuntary. Then you have two paths from here. Either the intellect ignores, or it willingly chooses to pay attention to it. This is voluntary, all right? This is the equivalent of like analyzing or planning. You voluntarily started thinking about the security measures in the vault, what could be in there. You could have taken it and ignored it. But you voluntarily chose to pay attention to it. This is a voluntary act. So once you're here, you then proceed to the act of deliberation, which we covered over here. By the way, if any of you were wondering, this whiteboard is my closet. I keep all my Full Suit Friday stuff in here. It's called space management. Why buy a clunky whiteboard on wheels when you can just throw it on your wall or closet? Anyway, deliberation. We select the means. All right, we're presented with multiple sets of means that we can analyze to go about dealing with the open bank safe. But you chose the means that will further your end. Now, after the intellect has selected this, it then passes on to the will. Because remember here, we drew our chart that after deliberation, we get the last practical judgment. You can willingly choose whether the will forms the intention to carry it out, or it's deemed as evil. This is a voluntary decision. Now, I want to very clearly define what is an intention. An intention is you are doing the act. Like, me intending to rob a bank is me showing up with the crew, armed and ready to rob the bank, realizing the door's locked, and now we gotta go back in the truck. That's intention. That's actually committing the act and being stopped by some unforeseen circumstance. That's actually walking up to the guy, trying to pickpocket him, and then he makes a turn and gets in his car. That's an intention. All right? It's not the same as deciding that you want to do something, which is deliberated here in the deliberation process. So first, we've got a little theme that we explored in the previous chapter. Oh yes, invincible ignorance. If you did not know the thing, you cannot freely choose it. So therefore, it's not a voluntary act, and you are not responsible for acts which you are vincibly ignorant about the consequences of, or the nature of. So we discussed previously that you need to be free to choose something. Now, I used the example of all treaties that are signed at gunpoint are not valid treaties because you didn't have a choice. You couldn't freely choose. Your life was in danger. That's not the same as fear. Fear does not make you invincible, but it lessens the degree to which you are responsible. That does not make you absolved, okay? When you go to confession, it's still one of the sins you gotta confess. But it lessens the degree to which you are responsible. Because when you think in fear, we have this call to the sensitive appetite, also known as the emotions, which are driving your decision-making process. And you are not rationally allowing your intellect to make this decision-making process, to which you are responsible. And the same can be said for passion. Okay? Passion is another appeal to the emotions, another appeal to the sense appetites. And for reasons I've just discussed, when you allow your emotions to take over your decision-making process, you are not entirely in control of the decisions which you are making. And therefore, if you're not entirely in control of them, they're not entirely free acts. Now, we say not entirely because emotions can be controlled. That's a very difficult lesson I had to learn. You think I'm listening to my emotions when I'm sitting there for several hours a day studying 10 AP classes? Back to this. Come on, Meek. Let's focus now. Emotions can be controlled, but it's very difficult to control them. And it would require an extreme amount of foresight to be able to control them. So that's chapter 5. Enjoy life.